F&O InsureTech presents Bob Frady, CEO and co-founder of HazardHub.
I got a new car and it had a GPS in it. And, GPSs are great. You make a wrong turn, they come back, they tell you the right way to go. So I decided I was going to try to break this GPS and see how much it could take. So I made like 6 wrong turns in a row. And the first 5, it was great. But then on the 6th wrong turn, it went, if you didn't want my advice, why did you ask me in the first place? And I looked at the voice settings, and it turns out it was set to wife. So I changed it to girlfriend, and I made 6 wrong turns, and it goes, I just love your sense of adventure.
Hey, podcast world, that was today's guest, the one, the only, Bob Frady from HazardHub.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you,
That was
Bob.
funny.
We've had a lot of different introductions on this show, but we've never had a little stand-up to start a show off. What do you think of that, Lee?
I thought it was great. No, I had no idea that Bob Frady was a stand-up comedian.
Our Cracker Jack podcast content producer, Alicia Moss, went out into the wonderful wide world of the internet and found a video of Bob doing stand-up, which he used to do but is retired from as he pursues HazardHub full-time. And he was good enough to give us a sample of his work.
I appreciate that. That's
funny.
wonderful, Bob.
It was
That
very
was
funny.
wonderful.
It was very
Speaking
funny.
of the internet, there's a lot of things you can find out there on that World Wide Web, aren't there?
Yeah, like, for example, maybe what are the underwriting risks for your home?
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be neat if there was a company that could collect and produce data to help insurance companies underwrite their risk better?
Using just like one source?
Using multiple sources and allowing APIs.
Cool. So using scores of different data sources, bringing them together to give you very pertinent and important underwriting information for your home.
Exactly. Wouldn't that be neat?
Yeah, is there someplace you could go to look at that?
I happen to know a guy who can maybe tell us a little bit about that.
You know a guy who knows a guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're not going to give it away. You have to listen to the episode, but it's on the episode. Bob Frady, co-founder and CEO of HazardHub, will be with us today, and he will be talking about many things to do with underwriting and the underwriting data world, including a free site that they stand up where you can put in your home address and find out about relative underwriting risks of your own home or any property, I guess, in the United States.
Yeah.
And this is kind of new for us because we haven't really touched in the underwriting world before. So this is the first time we're in there. What do we think about that, Lee? What do we think about underwriting?
I think it's great. We talk a lot about claims, and I mean, you've got to have a policy before you have a claim. Therefore, you have to underwrite the policy. And a lot of times during claims, you find information that can help underwriting on renewal. So it's this giant circle that really works hand in hand. So I think this is a great place to start talking about underwriting.
HazardHub, Bob's company, we've met a few times at a couple different conferences and events. A straight startup company, not VC funded, but 4 years old, been around for a while and getting a lot of traction out there because not only do they provide their data directly to carriers, they provide it baked into other products and services that are out there. So very interesting company that we want you to hear more about.
Yeah, let's do it now.
So without further ado, here is our interview with the Jerry Seinfeld of InsureTech, Bob Frady. Hey,
Well, there you go. It's a hell of an intro.
Take two. We are here with our very special guest, Mr. Bob Frady, CEO and co-founder of HazardHub, coming to us today from
Orange County, California, baby.
beautiful
Hey.
Orange County, California. So this is one of those podcasts where we have 2 people in California separated by only 500 miles and everyone else in Texas. So how you doing, Bob?
I am fantastic. It's a little hot outside today. It's
Really?
It's up over 80 degrees, which makes us a little worried this time of year in California.
Worried about?
wildfires.
Oh, yeah.
The rain's supposed to come tomorrow, so let's hope it gets here
Ah,
sooner rather than later.
we'll be
Calms things
talking.
down.
I think we'll probably cover a little wildfire action as we get deeper into today's podcast.
Sure.
So you are the CEO, as I mentioned, CEO and co-founder of HazardHub. Why don't you give us a minute or two on what the heck HazardHub is and what you guys do?
Sure. HazardHub, in a nutshell, tells you all the bad stuff that can happen to a property. So wind, hail, tornado, lightning, storm surge, wildfire, flood, ice dams, mold formation, all of the things that can cause a problem with a property, whether it's commercial or personal, are the things that we try to measure. We also look at some basic data like where's the fire hydrant, where's the fire station, what are the property characteristics of that location, how many bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, what's the building construction type, etc., etc. So lots and lots of data to help you understand what the risks are of a property.
Because the more you know.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because when we built this company, we built it because my former mother-in-law had a flood at her property. She lived near a river in Massachusetts. And so we looked up all the data and saw that she wasn't in a flood zone, but she was right next to one. And then I asked her, did anyone ever tell you that you were right next to a flood zone? And she said no. And then the river did what it does, flooded out her basement and caused a $30,000 loss. And so, which was uncovered. And so I thought, well, we can build a company to solve for that. So we did. And initially our goal was for the consumer to know what all of the risks are around their property, because it's usually their biggest investment. And we
Right.
want to help them
Sure.
to protect it. But we also knew that there was a B2B market for this data with carriers and companies who work with carriers. So we've tabled the consumer end for now, but we do hope to get back there sometime in 2020.
Well, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I think the consumer part is very interesting, is that you really have, as far as I know, two websites out there. You have your HazardHub website, which has all the company information and the B2B information, if you will. But you also run this interesting little side hustle called Home Free Risk.
Free home risk.
Excuse me. That's right. How do they fit together?
Well, they're both driven off the same API. So the data that you get on one would be the data that you get on the other. Initially, what we were going to do is we were going to build a consumer product using free home risk as a free report that people could get, and then invite them to apply for insurance on the back end.
Oh.
And what we found is that we weren't very good at developing that back end. But we decided to leave that. I mean, we're always a consumer company first. It's like there's a real imbalance between what carriers know and what insureds know, and we are looking to sort of rectify that imbalance. So free home risk was actually our very first property, what we launched with, and it's free for anyone. You can type in your address and get a report card for that address. We think that there's a lot more we could do with that, which would come into play later. But we wanted to, you have to have revenue in order to build products, and right now the HazardHub side of the business is generating the lion's share of our revenue.
So HazardHub, you are a data company, is that right?
Correct.
And so basically you are gathering data from, I guess, all over America from different entry points, capturing all that, and then presenting a report or APIs to help underwriters correctly underwrite risk. Is that it in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, that's it. We did a focus group at an event with a bunch of insurers about a month or so ago, and they said that three of the biggest problems were that underwriters don't have enough data to properly underwrite a location, which we helped solve for. The second is that cats can be a tremendous surprise to them, catastrophes, and we do a pretty good job of not necessarily telling you whether it will happen, but how likely it is to happen at a particular location. And then the third is that it takes them forever to create a price. Because the data coming in is so slow, they want to be able to price faster. And all three of those are what we focus on with HazardHub.
I see. So I read where you have an API and companies can tap into that API and pull data pretty much at lightning speed. Is that correct? Did I hear that right?
Correct. Lightning moves slightly faster, but we're on a goal to get that fast. Right now, you type it in, or you send us an API request, and it takes about 2.5 seconds to get back over 700 pieces of data about that particular property.
And is that data collected from, a couple of sources, or is it many, many, many sources?
Many, many, many. Altogether, with all the data sources that we have, it's close to 700 different data sources that we have. There are some that are bigger than others, but there are some that we gather ourselves. Like we gather.
Yeah, that was my question. Yeah.
Yep. We build our own fire station database. We had looked at some of the available tools and we're like, we're missing a lot of stations. So we built our own. We update it every day and publish those updates every other month. And then we build our own fire hydrant network. What we found is that fire hydrant coverage was one of those things that people talk about it, but they don't actually have the databases to show where hydrants are located. And because, we are gluttons for punishment, we decided to build our own fire hydrant database.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be
sounds
hard. Very hard.
Yeah, we have a full team dedicated to it now where we'll go into a state. We're like locusts. We'll go into a state and we'll drive the state and we'll pull out where the hydrants are and publish them all or put them into our database. So it's a painstaking process. But luckily, hydrants don't move very quickly. So once you have them, they're there. And it really gives us a lot of insight as to, we're seeing a lot of things because we have this data that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So it's kind of it's a unique data set. It's a pain in the neck data set to build. It's taken us 3 years to get to 10.5 million hydrants, but it's incredibly valuable in terms of understanding the risk of a property.
As a Boy Scout, I remember we did numerous Eagle projects where we would go paint the top of fire hydrant certain colors, red or green. And I don't know if this was everywhere, but where I live, certain fire hydrants have certain pressures.
Yep.
And is that something you also capture, or is that even needed? I don't even know if that's needed.
We don't capture that. The assumption that we make is that if there's a fire hydrant there, it's there to put water out.
Right.
The degree that it puts out water is always subject to local interpretation. So we try to standardize that and not consider that in the building of the hydrant data set.
Well, that's good. And that was I never knew if it was based on the actual city decided it or if it was the pressure at that time. But I know water pressure goes up and down even during periods of the day. So I didn't know how accurate that was.
Yeah, it's, I'm sure that if you had the best measurement devices on every hydrant, they could give you an accurate answer. And it's not that anybody's trying to do a bad job or be misleading. It's such a variable across the data set that we just decided to take it out and not try to gather it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're getting tens of millions of fire hydrants. That's a lot.
Yeah.
You got it right with me. I have a fire hydrant almost in my front yard. On your free site, I was able to kind of locate that. I mean, I'm close to a fire hydrant.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome. It's you. So I went to a family vacation earlier this year, and we ended up renting a house out in the desert. And we pull up to the house, and there's a fire hydrant in the front lawn. And I'm like, even when I'm not trying to find fire hydrants, I'm finding fire hydrants.
They're everywhere, which is great. It's wonderful.
Everywhere.
I am curious on this being a underwriting tool that is used in insurance, which is typically a very traditional business model. They do things certain ways, and sometimes it's hard to change, especially in the underwriting model. They've been very successful. They're high profits. They know what they're doing, but there's always room for improvement and more. What is the adoption like? Are you seeing pushback, or are you seeing people accepting this new data and trusting it?
Well, I joke with people that I started in InsureTech because I wanted to make money as slowly as possible.
How's that working out?
And you're absolutely correct. Here's what we know based upon, this is now our 4th year as a company, but our 3rd year in the market. is there are a lot of people who are doing very well. And frankly, the business model has been around. The law of large numbers is a fantastic business model. It's been around for hundreds of years and has worked very well. So you can't go into this business expecting an overnight success, especially when you're. The second part is if you're touching the core, which is actuarial and underwriting, it's an even slower process than if you're on something like marketing or something like that.
Right.
So we knew
It's even a more exclusive club.
Yeah, so we knew it was going to be slow, but what we also know is that some of the existing providers out there aren't necessarily the easiest folks in the world to work with, and they have a lot of acquisitions that they have to pay for, and they get you coming and going. So for people who value the sharper knife, we're an excellent alternative. We quadrupled last year. We're on track to quadruple again this year. Quadrupling again next year. The number gets bigger, but we have ideas about how to do that as well. So we're starting to see some real uptake. But then the second part of it is, if your data stinks, you're not going to sell anything. And part of what we do is we give our data to people to say, try it out and see how you like it. And they make the decision themselves to bring us on or not bring us on. That elongates the sales cycle enormously, but it makes for a better sale or makes for a better client relationship in the long run because we're not selling them anything. They're proving to themselves that this stuff is better than what they currently have. And the adoption rate's been very strong on that so far. The bigger the company, the longer it takes.
Yes.
But we're starting to see some real progress even in those larger companies.
Good.
I saw a statistic that said that this kind of information or the data that I guess underwriters in general are working with or policies, they have 30% error rate. Is that correct?
It depends on who you talk to and what exactly that you're looking at. Some people will say it's 30%. Other people will say it's 50%. When you have a manual process, you introduce error. It's just the way it is. It's not limited to insurance. And a lot of this data gathering is a manual process where either the agent has to collect it or the insured has to provide it, or some level of scraping is done from public resource data to try to gather it. And those all introduce error. And so, what we're trying to do is just to eliminate that level of error. We're not going to eliminate all 30% of application errors. That's not what we're doing. But we do try to make a dent in that number. That's for sure. Like we had a customer who just came on with us, and one of the reasons they came on with us is because they didn't know the square footage of the property that they were writing. And I'm like, how can you be writing a property when you don't know the square footage?
Right.
And they were like, well, we think we know it, but we don't know it. And what we discovered is that some of the properties that they were writing were significantly different in size than what they thought they were writing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, is your customers, your business plan, your business model, you don't just sell to insurance carriers, correct?
Correct. We're focused on the insurance industry, but we say that our market are insurance carriers and the companies who love them.
I like that.
So it could be, because you know what? It's as much of a pain in the neck as it is for us to sell to a carrier. It's just as much of a pain for them to onboard a new provider. So
Yes.
we'll port our data in through other platforms or other systems that allow carriers to get the data without having to have a new relationship.
So you're working with other underwriting tool companies, if you will.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
It might be an imagery company. It might be a policy admin system. It might be an AI company. It might be an inspection company where we're providing the data that they then provide to their end customer.
So what are some of the data points you capture? I went on and I did the free home risk, and I got I think 16 checks, earthquake, wind. I got a score on those. What are some of the other data points you can capture to really help out with the underwriting?
Well, I think the first set of data are what we call the basics. How far are you from the coastline? And frankly, there's a lot of disagreement about what exactly the coastline represents.
Okay.
Is it the beach, or is it where water might come into your house, a water entry point?
Right.
So we provide multiple distances to the coast, a high resolution and a low resolution, and a beach resolution for people who really like to know where the beach is. Then things like, where's the fire station? Not only we measure these data sets. The fire station database changes about 100 stations per month. Will either close or move or temporarily close. And that doesn't mean that much when you're looking at a total database of almost 56,000 units. But if you're underwriting that property, it means a heck of a lot in terms of how well that house is covered.
Right.
Then the hydrant stuff, it still amazes me that when you take an application, people want to know where your nearest hydrant is. And the answer most people have is, well, I don't know, it's around here somewhere.
Sure.
And we help to eliminate that question.
Trust me,
So,
there's one in my neighborhood.
yeah, exactly. There's one around here somewhere. I know it. I've seen it. And let me get my dog to go find it, kind of a thing. So that basic piece of information is really some of our most popular pieces of information. And then that second category is the perils. It's, what's your risk of damaging wind event, of a hail, of a tornado, wildfire, getting a lot of attention out west, flood, not just FEMA flood, but storm surge and our own flood model that looks at, okay, you might think that you're outside of flood risk because you're not in a FEMA zone, but guess what? Rivers aren't very good at obeying where the FEMA zones are.
Right.
They're very willful. They go where they want to. The other basic piece of information that we provide is elevation of a property.
Good one.
Because a lot of times it's what's the elevation of this location versus what's the elevation of the nearby water. So lots and lots of risk around peril. And then in the commercial line side, we have things like, where are the underground storage tanks in this location? Where are the toxic release facilities? Where are the brownfields, and where are the Superfund sites? Because a lot of times commercial lines carriers will carry extra risk because of the property of the environmental impact to the policy that they're writing. So lots and lots of specialized data in the commercial line space. And then characteristics, what are the things that define this property? Does it have a basement? What's the number of stories in this location? What's the square footage in this location?
Yeah, I'm interested in the Superfund part. And of course, I'm interested because when I ran my address, I'm 4,000 feet from a Superfund site.
Mm-hmm.
That's uncomfortable.
Well, yeah.
What is a Superfund?
It's
Lee's showing his age. Lee's 14, so he doesn't know what Superfunds are.
Well, what is it, Rob?
I'll let Bob go ahead.
It is a toxic area declared by the government in need of cleanup, basically. Some of the worst environmental locations. It could have been a manufacturing facility that leached chemicals into the ground. It could be a chemical storage facility. It could be a variety of different things. But a lot of the manufacturing that we did in this country, pre-EPA especially, went straight into the ground, and it poisons the ground. And Superfunds are a way to sort of delineate those areas and cordon them off for redevelopment or for getting fixed.
So like with the Superfund, the government or government databases must be a huge treasure trove for you guys.
Yep. Yeah, EPA databases certainly are. And, the risk in something like a Superfund site doesn't come from the site itself generally. It comes from, well, what happens if there's a flood in your neighborhood? Then that's where you have a lot of danger from Superfund sites, because if the flood is encompassing, then those chemicals can leach into the surrounding water, which is bad news for a lot of folks. There was just an article published today about a government agency that said that 60% of Superfund sites are at risk from climate change. And, putting aside all of the issues about sea level rise and all that stuff, there are a significant number of Superfund sites that are at danger from just pure flood. And flood's probably the worst risk. Wildfire, there's some risk,
right.
but flood's probably the number one risk.
Right,
for
because
Superfunds.
Right, because that's just going to wash over the damn thing, and
Yep.
And then whatever's sloshing around in the ground there is going to move around in the flood by the flood waters, right?
Yep. In it leaching into the water supply is probably the.
But it can be something as seemingly innocuous as like an abandoned gas station, right?
That's a brownfield. A brownfield, which we also measure separately. A brownfield could be a dry cleaning location, or an abandoned gas station, or a bakery, or something where the ground needs to be repaired, but it's not nearly as encompassing as a Superfund site would be.
Mm-hmm. One other question on your free home risk. I live in Northern California. I live near Sacramento, and I scored C on hail. Mm-hmm. I would think that hail is one of the primary risks that you guys measure, or that people are interested in. Mm-hmm. Certainly.
Yep.
Why would I grade out a C in a place where there's little or almost no hail, and when it happens, it's the size of a pea?
Well, it's hard to say without looking at your specific location. There are anomalies that we sometimes see, but usually it's because people's memories aren't as long as the weather patterns. And we do look for larger 1-inch hail, the ability for it to be formed in the atmosphere. So without looking at your location, it's hard to say. Uh-huh. But also, we've recently undergone a pretty major upgrade to our wind, hail, tornado, and lightning data sets that may change the score for that area, because we recognize that some of these numbers they're okay. They're from government data sources, but they could be better. And uh-huh. that's the other thing that we try to do is, if we see something that's a better way to handle the problem, we attack it, mm-hmm. and not attack it in a negative way, but we attack the problem and try to figure out a better way to supply the answer. And some of our new wind, hail, tornado, and lightning data, which will be updated in free home risk at the beginning of December, may change the score for that location.
Well, there's a couple other questions we want to ask you, but before we move on from this, I think it's really great and progressive that you guys have a site like Free Home Risk, that you're sharing the data. It's not a mystery. It's, and in the insurance world, as you know, we're used to people being very closed and keeping their cards very, very close to their chest, and think there's a lot of secrets and a lot of things we don't talk about or tell anybody. And so it's refreshing. And I think that this is one of the interesting aspects of InsureTech for our industry, and one of the really positive influences that's not necessarily measured in the insurance industry, is that it's kind of pushing the insurance industry to be more transparent and open. And it's okay if people know stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's okay.
It's like family dynamics, back in the day, people never said anything about anything. So then you deal with all this frustration and you wonder why, you don't know certain things. Well, now people tend to be more open, whether that's good or bad, you can draw your own conclusions, but we vote for openness because we're really convinced that if you know what the risks are of your property, you will take precaution more precaution than if you didn't know what the risks were around your property. And by the way, a C grade's not all that bad. A C is average. It's like a high school grade. It's not great. Your parents might be disappointed, but you didn't fail. So
I'm not going to get grounded.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Because I'm like hesitating to show this to my wife, because that's
she doesn't have to sign off on it or anything.
That's immediately what she's going to focus in on. C.
That's average. That's okay.
What is the grading? I live in Waco, where we get hail all the time, and a D is what I got. Is that the lowest? Is it? Okay.
No, F is the lowest. F is the worst 10% of risk generally.
Okay.
So of all the places in the country, F would be the worst 10% of places. Then a D is the next 20% lower. So you're in the bottom 30%, but not the worst 10% as a D. And yeah, you get some hail down there.
And what about earthquake? Because I live in Northern California, although Sacramento is pretty geologically stable relative to some other areas in California, like where you are, for example, or the Hayward Fault in the Bay Area. How do you guys? Where does that come from? Is that
The USGS?
Thank you. I knew it had a name.
I could hear it just waiting to get
testing. It was testing. I was testing.
We start with the USGS data, and we build our models based upon some of the base data in USGS. A lot of times, the earthquake will come down to a soil factor. Like if you remember the Loma Pietra quake, there were some areas that had a lot of damage, and some other areas that were proximal that didn't have as much damage, which is really a factor of liquefaction.
Right.
Does the soil turn water-like? If you look at one of the biggest earthquakes, almost damaging earthquakes in the country, it was actually in the Midwest, in the New Madrid fault area, where all that soil basically just turned to jelly and the buildings all fell down. It's a huge concern in the Midwest. So we look at a variety of factors, primarily tied to MMI and what the damage level would be based upon what we think the underlying soil looks like. So it's a little more art than science in the scores for that. But with all of our data, we always give you the grade, and we don't do this on free home risk because we don't want to confuse people with too much data. But for the back end, for our underwriting and actuarial customers, we give not only our grade, but we give what was used to create that grade, and we give you all of the inputs that were used to create that grade. And we'll even give you the schema if you're a customer. So we're very open about how we've created this. If you don't believe it, or if your data says, "Oh, I don't like this factor, so I want to increase or decrease the emphasis on it," we give you all of that data. We don't believe in black boxes. We're super open about our data, and want you to be comfortable with it before we would ever ask you to use it.
Cool. I want to talk for a few minutes about being an InsureTech, which you guys certainly are. In fact, congratulations. I saw you on the FinTech Global Top 100 InsureTech list.
Yeah, thank you. It was a lovely surprise. And the best part of it is I showed my kids, and they're like, "I thought you collected hydrants for a living." Like, that's right. Your dad's top 100.
That's right.
Now go clean your room.
Big deal.
So has that gotten you a little notice, a little attention?
Yeah, it certainly has. I think the hardest part for any InsureTech is awareness. The number one question we get asked by every carrier we talk to is, "Well, who else is using you?" And
really? Sure.
Yeah, to which point I say, well, if you have to ask that question, you're not really ready to work with us, because you're just sort of doing a Me Too type of thing, which is really sort of it's a little smug and a little flip of an answer, and it's really not that fair. This is a surety-based business, and you have to have people feel comfortable with who you are. One of the ways that they feel comfortable is by other people recognizing who you are, their peers. So when they ask us that question, who else are you working with? They're just looking for that safety to say, okay, these guys are legit. So when we get the things like the top 100, that's another way that people see that we're legit. And then when we test our own data against their book, then they see how legit we actually are. So it's all trying to answer the legitimacy question, and that top 100 certainly does help to answer that legitimacy question.
Well, I think the legitimacy question is important because I'm sure that most carriers, anyways, who have used different InsureTech tools, not everyone turns out to be so cool and terrific as it might seem up front. And I mean, we've even had that experience. The InsureTech tools that we use at our company are different than they were a year ago. Different
Yep.
companies, different providers.
Hmm.
Reason being is that these are mostly very small companies trying to make their way. They may be VC funded or, um, but and they may have some money behind them, but they're pedaling as fast as they can to provide a product.
Yeah.
Um, and like we were saying before, when you talk about carriers, you talk about being conservative and being careful and being risk averse. So trying new companies is always going to be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah. It's the ultimate challenge of the InsureTech is how do you get enough um, how how do you get enough in terms of success so that you can convince sort of how do you cross the chasm is really what it comes down to,
Hmm.
which is what every startup has to do regardless of industry. It
Right.
just takes longer and it's harder in the insurance business, and you'll see some successes that are relatively overnight, but they're never really overnight successes. And it's a it's a challenging business to be in, that's for sure.
Yeah, no question. One of the things that we've learned, one of the things that we've discovered is that that there's this large ecosystem out there, not only to support insurtechs but to push them forward and to help them along. But there's a bazillion insurtechs.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you guys aren't the only underwriting data play out there.
Well, the one of the interesting things is we are actually a supplier to a lot of people who compete with us, because we know that our data is not the only answer that people want to have. They might want
Mm-hmm.
to have some other data sources
Mm-hmm.
Right.
that are
Mm-hmm.
all together, and so we provide our data to those people. And it doesn't matter to us how you get our data as long as you're getting it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at someone um, like a Demist data or a Fenris, that are multi-sourcing pieces of information, or even an Experian or an Equifax that's providing this level of data, we're the supplier of that data. So it creates a little bit more confusion. But our reason for doing that is we don't want any artificial barriers to doing business with us. So if you want to get it through this company, great. You want to get it through us directly, great. You want to get it through somebody else, fantastic. As long as you're getting the data, the sweet, sweet HazardHub data.
It's been great to have you on today, Bob. We like we said at the top, we don't get to spend a lot of time in and around underwriting, but it's such an integral, it's cornerstone piece of the insurance equation, and we we at the claims end of it deal with underwriting insights or lack thereof every day. So it's kind of cool to hear more about it.
Well, thank you. I think that the claims departments and the underwriting departments may share the same brand, but sometimes they just don't spend enough time talking to each other. We look at things as sort of pre-game, in-game, and post-game. Pre-game is how do I learn as much as I can about a property before I decide to write it. That's where we come in. Then there's in-game. All right, there's a tornado going on. Is it going to hit my house? That we don't mess around with that one too much. And then there's post-game, which is the claims area. Something
Hmm.
happened. How can I better use this knowledge to inform the front end so I write a better policy or price that policy better?
Sure.
And that's where we think a great disconnect happens. And maybe we just don't see it because we're not as involved on the claims end, but claims can be so powerful in informing underwriting that I think it's a missed opportunity for those customers where those groups don't talk to each other.
You hear a lot more about it than we used to about specific claim information being cycled back to the underwriting department. And I think that many carriers, particularly the really good ones, are getting better and better at that, because why wouldn't you want to capture those data points? And now there's tools and products out there that can even do that automatically, I'm sure. And
Yep. That's why we're here as the InsureTechs to help bridge those gaps.
okay, well, it's cool to have a straight up good old American InsureTech on our show,
Thank you.
and we really appreciate it. And we saw you at the Property Information Report, Brian Sullivan's conference last week, and we'll look forward
Yes.
to where are you next?
I'm speaking in San Antonio at some event in the beginning of December, and then after that, I'm on an airplane visiting customers somewhere for pretty much the next 2 to 3 months.
Okay.
Which is where I'd rather be. As lovely as this is, and as much as I've enjoyed speaking with you guys, you don't write any checks, so
No, sir,
I need
we
to
don't.
need to find where the money is.
We're a receiver of checks, not a writer of checks. If all goes well. Well, listen, thank you so much, and be nice, Lee. Say goodbye.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Lee, it was a pleasure talking to you. Even though Rob did most of the talking.
Yeah, that's how Rob is.
that's-
You had the good questions.
yeah.
Hey, thank you.
Ooh, ouch. Well, that was enjoyable.
There's so much data out there, isn't it? I mean, just think about what all we talked about with the weather data, the size of the home. You can even get photos of a home. There's so much data. I think that HazardHub really has a neat market that they're going after here.
Yeah, and I really like that they're not buying off more than they can chew. They're not creating some kind of end-to-end underwriting,
Right.
one size fits all, one-stop shop thing. They're a data company, and they're about data, and they've ferreted out and created so many sources that other either carriers or underwriters or other underwriting products can take into their own program.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when Bob was saying that they have actually gone out and captured data of their own. A lot of times you don't hear of these data companies doing that on the underwriting. They're bringing it in from government or Zillow or different places, but they've actually gone out and even gone as far as counting fire hydrants. And I imagine that's a database that they can share with others. It's a very neat business model. I thought it was neat how they pivoted, originally going straight to the consumer,
To consumer.
and
right.
and pivoted, actually going to the insurance companies. But it's a logical step in my book, and I think it's a win. I think it's a very neat company. Great people behind it.
And for those of us who don't work in underwriting, we work with underwriting sometimes, but not in it. It's very different than claims, and certainly very related because the better you do one, the less you have to do of the other,
Exactly.
theoretically.
Yeah. I mean, you've got to have good underwriting. You've got to write the right policies, and that'll help you decrease your claims. But even in the interview, when we talked about the circle, bringing claim data back over into your underwriting report for your renewals, I mean, it's a very important cycle of data and information.
And he's a retired stand-up
I
comic.
think once you are, you always are.
Oh, really? You don't think you don't graduate from that?
No, I don't think it
It's,
disappears. I think it's always there.
It's kind of like a condition you have for the rest of your life.
I think so.
Well, listen, we're all really grateful for Bob for his funny, for his willingness to give us a little stand-up sample at the top of our show today. And we loved having him on with us. And we continue to try to survey everything that's happening in InsureTech from one end to the other. And this was another example today. And thank you, Bob, for being with us. And we ask that you join us next time and subscribe to our podcast. And that's about it. Did I forget anything, Lee?
No.
Except what?
Goodbye, everybody.